over the world, one creature has captivated the human imagination more than any other. Often seen, rarely photographed, never captured. It is called Yeti, Sasquatch, but most know the creature as Bigfoot. Now a team of top scientists search the globe, using the latest technology and their expert knowledge of the animal kingdom. They question the creature's very existence, uncover shocking new evidence, and wonder if we've been searching for the wrong creature all along. Join us for the definitive guide to Bigfoot. In 2009, more than 250 unexplained sightings of what was believed to be Bigfoot were recorded in North America. But they're the tip of the iceberg. Now, for the first time, we have created a global map of Bigfoot sightings. More than 10,000 from the last 200 years. At first, the sightings appear random, but closer scientific analysis reveals hidden but unmistakable patterns. More than 95% of all recorded sightings take place in Asia or North America. Nearly 70% of these are at high altitude and dense tree cover. There are also distinct hotspots, where sightings are far more common than elsewhere. One is the Himalayas. Here, generations of eyewitnesses describe a gigantic snow ape, the Yeti. 2,000 miles south on the islands of Indonesia, locals talk of a wild ape man called Orang Pendek. While up in Central Asia, sightings of ancient Neanderthal-type humans go back centuries. And here in the wilderness of North America, they see a giant ape-like beast, Sasquatch. Vancouver, British Columbia. This booming city has a population of over 2 million people. But right on its doorstep is a vast wilderness. 62 million acres of ancient forest, much of which has never been logged. The wilds of British Columbia have one of the greatest concentration of Bigfoot encounters in the world, more than 400 in the last century. Here in the forests surrounding Chilliwack Lake in the summer of 2008, 3 sightings took place within 10 miles of each other. 2 on the same night. This driver is alone on a remote dirt road. He's never believed in Bigfoot, but he's about to see something that will profoundly challenge what he has previously regarded as fiction. This is the report he filed.
I was coming up the road here, in the lights. I seen something, like a bear almost. But I realized this couldn't be a bear. It seen me and immediately left. It moved like a ninja. Nothing can move like that.
Like hundreds of others, this eyewitness chose to remain anonymous for fear of being ridiculed. But his words are real. 3.5 hours later, another encounter takes place when a trucker spots an identical creature on the same stretch of road. The distance between the 2 sightings? Just 1 mile. The local newspaper filed this report. Both eyewitnesses were convinced that what they saw was not a bear. 10 miles away, and 6 weeks later, a third encounter takes place in the forests around Chilliwack. This experienced hunter was out stalking deer off the Ruby Creek Forest Service Road. What happened next has haunted him ever since. Without warning, a rock hurls toward him.
I swung my upper body and my rifle over to the side, thinking that it was a bear, and it wasn't. It was a rock in mid-flight. It looked to be about 2 feet long. So I was looking to where it came from. Then I saw a flash of black, and it took off through the bush. It took it literally a couple of seconds from approximately this area here to about there.
There are no records of bears ever throwing rocks.
I come into contact with bears quite often, and this was not a bear. Didn't exactly want to find out what it was. I don't like knowing that there's something out there that can pick me up and use me as a toothpick. I spent the last 2 years trying to forget it ever happened.
These 3 encounters are just a small sample of the rich history of sightings in this area. Stories of rock-throwing wild men date back generations in the Chilliwack region. It's July 1934, and local Native American Tom Cedar is out fishing for trout. He's lived and hunted in this remote area all his life. But he's taken completely by surprise when what he reports to be a sasquatch starts hurling rocks, trying to capsize his canoe. It's one of a series of attacks. And the first time local tribes share their long history of Sasquatch encounters with outsiders. This Sasquatch rock art from Northern California was painted in 500 AD. How do you explain hundreds of encounters stretching back over centuries? Something is out there, but what? Here in one of the world's Bigfoot hotspots, the forests of Canada, 5 of the world's leading scientists have come together to solve this global mystery. Field researchers and specialists, experts in discovering new species of primates, ancient humans, the habitats and behavior of the great apes, the fossil record, and the search for unidentified hominids. Their mission is to focus on how to find these unidentified creatures and establish once and for all if they exist.
This is one of the most intriguing questions of zoological exploration that faces science in this modern era.
Jeff Meldrum has first-hand experience of what may have been Bigfoot.
Did you hear that?
That rock was pretty good size. Let's stay here. We've had action there. We've had rocks thrown at us.
In 2007, he was part of a team besieged by an unidentified rock-throwing creature in a remote Canadian cabin.
One of us was urinating off the porch when the first stone hit the side of the cabin.
I'm still shaking.
Teammate Ian Redmond has led several expeditions searching for evidence of the Yeti. He's convinced something unexplained is out there.
If you put aside the hoaxers and the ones that are clearly mistaken identity, there's still a nugget, which is why we're all here.
The team will concentrate on a fundamental principle. If Bigfoot is real, it must fit into our understanding of the natural world, meaning it must do everything other animals do, from feeding to finding a mate. The scientists first examine the best evidence available, video and film footage. There are hundreds of examples of this sort of evidence for Bigfoot. Their first task is to eliminate the hoaxes. This video shot near the Canadian town of Banff seems convincing enough, until you realize an identical creature was seen promoting a local business the night before.
What is that? Don't tell me that's a Yeti.
Then there are the videos where the images are so indistinct, they could be almost anything. Once they eliminate the obvious hoaxes and the images that are so blurred or out of focus to make any real identification possible, there's very little left. The experts are not so surprised.
Animals are there at home in their environment, and we're often the intruder, the visitor, and evading human detection is not that difficult.
Just how well animals can live undetected by man was proven by this incredible video footage shot in 2007. It's almost all the evidence we have of a new species of man-sized primate, the billy ape. Found in the remote forest of Congo, Africa, it took primatologists a year to track down and film these giant-sized 300-pound chimps. But local people had talked about them for generations. Anna Nakaris has discovered 6 new species of primates.
I believe very much in what local people say. And if local people tell me something is there, I have a suspicion that it may be, even if I haven't seen it.
The team points to the discovery of the billy ape as a positive indicator for Bigfoot. If a new species as large as this has managed to live undetected by science for so long, could other species of giant ape-like creatures still be out there? The team goes in search of answers, heading out into the heart of the densest clusters of Bigfoot sightings in the world. And they tackle the single most controversial piece of Bigfoot evidence ever. A team of leading scientists are searching for evidence of Bigfoot that cannot be dismissed. Their goal? To separate fact from fiction and create the definitive guide to this mysterious creature. Research has identified the forests of British Columbia as one of its most probable habitats. Now Ian Redmond takes the search directly into the field. He's one of the world's leading gorilla trackers and is using his highly trained eye to look for signs of an unknown species of ape. Redmond is on Vancouver Island, a place where sightings of Sasquatch are so common, it's sometimes nicknamed Ape Island. The first thing he uncovers is a mysterious structure, one of several found on different parts of the island. It's an example of what is often referred to as a Sasquatch stick structure.
It is intriguing. Whatever did it, meant to do it. It's not an accident of trees falling. We can look all around us and see the odd tree falling, but nothing like this structure, this stick structure, which is what they're referred to as. The great apes all build nests to sleep in. They sometimes interweave bamboo stems that are this sort of thickness and therefore impossible for a man alone to break. And they form a platform above the ground to sleep on. But that doesn't look like anyone slept in it. It's just an interesting structure.
But if it isn't a nest, what could it be?
Ah, but that is interesting because it was broken off before it fell.
Redmond suspects another motive for the structure, which is also common in gorilla behavior.
If its intention is to tell other Sasquatch that there's a powerful male here and he can break off sticks, that would be an interesting interpretation. If its intention is to warn humans not to enter into the Sasquatch territory, I don't think it's working. It's just going to intrigue us all the more.
While the stick structures may not be conclusive, the fact is, the global map indicates that sightings in this area date back more than a century. One of Vancouver Island's hotspots is the area around the small town of Duncan. and sightings continue right up to the present day. It was 5 miles from here in 2005 that a local resident had what he describes as an encounter with a giant ape-like creature. Corey Combs is a local dirt bike rider. He grew up in and around the forests of central Vancouver Island. One June evening, he was out on his motorbike when he saw what he believes to have been a Sasquatch, face to face.
Set up camp, had a fire going. Got kind of late, and I could hear the bushes moving and branches breaking, but I didn't think much about it. But the noises, they kept coming, and I had that sense of something was watching me. And we got our flashlight going, and the batteries were just about to die. And all I remember was seeing the light shine on its face before the battery died. And that was the instant that I knew exactly what was watching me, that it was indeed Sasquatch. Very distinctive facial features, real broad cheeks, and very predominant eyebrow structure. The face of what looked like an ape. It turned, and then it was gone. And it just left me in just pure terror.
In June 2006, another alleged Sasquatch encounter took place 17 miles west of Duncan. Alan Robertson had pulled onto the roadside with his boat on a trailer when what he thinks could have been a giant ape suddenly attacked.
We stopped, do a pee break, but then everything started shaking inside the truck. My stepson says, "We're rolling backwards, we're rolling backwards." I said to him, "No, I've got my foot on the brake, I'm in park." This fear came over me. The safety chain was just hanging. The boat itself was twisted in its cradle, and there was 3 cracks here and 2 cracks here. Even now, when you think back, I get, shivers.
A third nighttime encounter with what the witness thought was a giant ape took place in June of 2009 on Mount Sicker, 6.5 miles from Duncan. Andrew DeWall was out putting his 4x4 through its paces on a forest road when he pulled in at the top of the mountain to check out the spectacular early evening view. But as he turned to an area of recently logged trees, he saw something he couldn't believe.
It looked like your typical picture of a Sasquatch that you'd see on a commercial. It had the flat face, the long draped hair, his arms were down by his knees. It popped up from behind that stump, just kind of came up. They had moved up into about that range, and I just kind of laughed it off, You don't expect to see something like that walking on 2 legs through the bush. So we got out of the truck, I picked up some rocks and I threw them off the corner of my Jeep, and then from the back corner of my vehicle, something yelled at us. Sounded like 20 dogs perfectly in sync, barking at once. It's kind of like a punch in the back of the head. And that's when we both kind of got scared and drove out of here.
Sasquatch howling like a pack of dogs sounds far-fetched, but gorillas also bark. An important factor linking all 3 of these Vancouver Island encounters is that they all took place after sundown. Apes don't have night vision, so how could Bigfoot be active at night?
What they could be good at is seeing in the moonlight, because the forest in the moonlight is very similar to the forest at dawn and dusk, and you can see a lot in a full moon. And so if you're clever and you're an ape, or most apes are very clever, it'd be a great time to think you could avoid competition by being adapted to those periods.
Ian Redmond now joins a team of local Bigfoot researchers on a moonlit stakeout. Cindy Dawson leads them. Her determination to find the truth comes from personal experience.
I was on a game trail, and 2 deer come flying up the trail, and I took that as a high alert that something's following them. This animal started vocalizing at me. The sound was so strong, I could feel it, and I was probably 200 feet away. It was like a yell, scream, roar, all in one sentence.
Tonight, Cindy's hoping she'll hear Sasquatch again. Her team have come equipped with a high-tech listening device and an advanced night vision camera to perhaps capture its image.
The reports suggest that they are often active at night, but the visibility, even in daytime there, is only going to be a few yards in any direction. So it's probably going to be sound that alerts us to their presence.
One twilight behavior other local researchers have noticed is tree knocking.
Sasquatch apparently respond to this because they say that if you sort of thwack twice, you'll get 2 taps coming back. And that's communicating.
This unusual behavior has been reported in other apes, notably chimps. While they wait for a reply, the researchers try another tactic, known to provoke a response from what they think is Sasquatch. A long call that they believe mimics the call made by females of the species. Incredibly, against all odds, a faint reply. But the researchers are confused. Replaying it again and again, it sounds like it's mimicking field expert Cindy Dawson. It sounds almost human. The next morning, Ian Redmond explores the area for signs of a great ape having passed through. What does he think of last night's distant cry?
When we heard from some distance behind us a reply, of course, the reaction was immediate. It was extremely exciting, but Cindy was very calm and didn't show immediate excitement at the reply. And I guess she was being cautious because it sounded human-like.
While they investigate further, Jeff Meldrum tries a new technique he hopes will uncover solid evidence. He's teamed up with Bigfoot researcher and habitat specialist John Mayenzinski. They've gone back to the drawing board and come up with a new and untried method for finding Sasquatch: tracker dogs.
Well, these detection dogs are used quite commonly in search and rescue efforts, but also in recovery efforts, finding the remains of a deceased hiker or hunter.
If dogs like these can be trained to locate human remains, they could, in theory, be trained to find the remains of Sasquatch. The most difficult part of the training is finding something that may give the dogs the creature's scent.
Our first sample came from a mountain range in Washington State, about 20 years old now. The other sample is much more recent. This is about 2 months old. It comes from the Rockies, and it was also associated with tracks.
It's a tough call. The experts can't be sure if the samples are genuine, nor that they give off enough scent to potentially train the dogs to hunt for remains. The 2 dogs take it in turns to try and pick up scent from either of the samples. The first dog detects nothing. But the second dog registers a definite scent on the second sample.
We have to depend on handlers, and they're telling us that we're getting a distinctive reaction from the dogs that indicates this is not a species of animal they've encountered before.
The fact that these dogs are reacting in ways that suggest this isn't either animal that they would be otherwise familiar with or not quite human is very promising.
The team needs to investigate what kind of creature they're looking for. Searching for clues, they'll take on the most controversial evidence in the history of Bigfoot, the Patterson film. But can they come to a final conclusion?
I mean, if there were no hoaxes, there we have a Sasquatch.
It is one of the greatest mysteries of our time, the search for a creature known as Bigfoot. Now 5 of the world's leading experts in natural history have come together to create the definitive guide to Bigfoot. Their goal? To see if there is proof that a creature is still out there. Our team has decided to examine the most controversial piece of evidence in existence. It consists of 953 frames of 16mm footage, known as the Patterson film. About 40 seconds of silent footage that has galvanized the world. It was shot here, Northern California, 6 Rivers National Park, Bluff Creek. Here in the fall of 1967 begins the greatest Bigfoot mystery of them all. As our team watches, primate experts Ian Redmond and Anna Nakaris point to the way the creature walks as a convincing argument for the film's authenticity.
It is very relaxed, very flowing gait, clearly comfortably walking bipedally. There's no question of awkwardness.
Interesting to see how the creature is swinging its arms quite strongly from side to side. That's something almost more than I'd expect to see even from a gibbon.
Team members Bill Sellers and Jack Rink remain skeptical. They focus on the man who shot the film and why.
For me, this clip is really all about trust. If you saw a clip of film like this from an impeccable source that you believed, then you'd have to take it at face value. This is, a hairy creature walking across the screen. If you don't trust the person who's actually taking the pictures, and you don't trust that it's not a hoax, it doesn't really matter how convincing it looks, because we know that Hollywood special effects and things can recreate almost anything, and it's very difficult to tell.
The man behind the camera was Roger Patterson. Numerous people question his motives, including journalist Mike McLeod.
Roger Patterson was a really interesting guy. He never had a real job, never wanted a real job. He was an inventor, and by all reports, quite really an artist with his hands. And he always felt that he was going to, one of his inventions was going to pay off.
Many think the Bigfoot of Bluff Creek was one of Patterson's inventions.
He thought it was possible that something like this could be out there, and that if he could find it, it would be an incredible thing. It'd be like one of the inventions he'd been chasing for so long. He started making these trips on horseback up into the mountains and talking to people in that area, and he came out with a book in 1966.
His book contained a sketch of a creature uncannily similar to the one he caught on film just over a year later. Could this have been the prototype? Roger Patterson's ambitions went much further than writing a book. He borrowed money to direct a Bigfoot movie.
He was buying cameras and film footage and raw stock and horses.
It was while preparing to shoot his movie that Patterson claims to have caught a female Sasquatch on camera, totally by chance. It all sounds too good to be true. Since then, the film has been subjected to 40 years of scientific scrutiny. From biometric analysis of the creature's gait and stride length, to markers showing its height in the natural environment, no one has managed to prove it's a fake. Examining a digitally enhanced section of the film for themselves, the team can see why.
Interesting that they chose a female. I think that's a more difficult thing to fake, is that female anatomy, and it looks pretty natural. And so if it is a costume or if it is a suit, I think they've done it pretty well.
If Roger Patterson wanted to create a hoax, why would he go to the trouble of creating an anatomically correct female? Ian Redmond agrees. The film seems too realistic to be a fake creature, created by a rookie filmmaker.
The bits of the anatomy just look very convincing. There appears to be shorter hair, slightly lighter hair around the waist. It just looks like the way a silverback's back narrows in a little bit and has that short hair there compared to the longer hair on the arms. It just looks like a silverback. And in 1967, most people had not seen photographs of gorillas. I think it's a very exciting bit of film.
But the team disagree on the head turn.
The part that really bothers me the most is the turn to look towards the camera. Looks so human to me.
But after hundreds of hours tracking gorillas in the wild, Ian Redmond is intimately familiar with how they move.
If you work with great apes, you see that many of those mannerisms, the way you stop, listen, look, are actually shared by all the great apes, human and non-human.
This remarkable footage of a gorilla, shot in a wildlife park, shows how closely they can resemble humans when walking on two legs. But journalist Mike McLeod thinks he has the story that shatters the Patterson myth.
Roger Patterson was broke and he had to provide for his family. And if you're making a film, you can spend a lot of money real quick. And he went through that money zippity. I think he went down and shot that film in California because he just needed to get, that was the money shot. He needed the money shot because any film about Bigfoot, it ain't gonna sell unless you got the money shot, and the money shot is the creature. Nobody's ever found a suit. It was either made of cowhide or it may have been rented from a costume rental studio. But in any case, he really brought his artistic sensibilities to the film he shot in 1967, which has become an icon.
Jeff Meldrum disagrees.
This is anything but just a man in a fursuit. There wasn't spandex, there wasn't Velcro, there wasn't anything but relatively cheap costume fur available, especially to an amateur who might be trying to pull off a hoax. If it's a hoax, it really stands as one of the most sophisticated accomplishments of its time.
I have to disagree, actually. It's not. I mean, to me, I look at it, and given its history and so forth, you know, it shrieks at me, man in suit. It really does.
Roger Patterson went to his grave, taking the truth with him, swearing both his film and Sasquatch were real.
I don't think it's incongruous that Roger Patterson would believe that a creature like that existed and then go out and shoot a fake film. It's actually quite interesting. That's his vision of what it looked like.
The team remain divided. Two believe it could really be a Sasquatch. Two are unconvinced. One is undecided. But as our global map reveals, real or fake, one incredible fact is certain. In the years after Roger Patterson's film, places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Texas, and Montana, who have almost no previous history of Bigfoot sightings, have become sightings hotspots. In just 10 years, there are more sightings than in the previous 150, and they just keep coming. Can all these eyewitnesses really be seeing Bigfoot?
In my experience, hoaxes have been actually very few and far between, and the challenge that we face is sifting the misidentifications, the over-imagination of enthusiastic investigators for whom every bump in the night, every call in the forest is evidence of Sasquatch activity.
It's a bit like the Loch Ness Monster. Anyone who sees a lump in the water hopes that's what they're seeing.
The team decides to investigate this massive surge. One of the places with the greatest rise in sightings of Bigfoot-like creatures is Florida. Here, locals claim to encounter a type of Bigfoot they call the skunk ape because of its terrible smell. In December 2000, these two photographs were sent to the Sarasota Sheriff's Department. They allegedly show a 5 to 6 foot tall skunk ape that broke into someone's garden. Is this creature fact, fiction, or a case of mistaken identity? Florida's tropical swamp is an ideal habitat for an ape, but the scientists are highly skeptical it's Bigfoot.
There's a whole huge menagerie of pets that have been released, particularly in South Florida.
We know that primates can thrive in these habitats, and chimpanzees are extremely adaptable, and there's a lot of food they can be eating in Florida.
Keeping chimps and orangutans as pets became fashionable in the 1970s, just when sightings of the skunk ape took off.
A very common issue is for people to buy a baby or an infant primate, keep it until it's a bit older and stronger, and often they're purchased illegally or they're held without a license. And all it takes is 2 or 3 to start a population.
They live a long time. I mean, a chimpanzee can easily live to be 60 years old, and so you only have to have a few releases, perhaps, you know, decades ago, and the odd sighting, and that would certainly keep alive a rumor of a skunk ape for a long, long time.
The team believes the huge surge of skunk ape sightings in Florida, more than 200, are a case of mistaken identity triggered by Roger Patterson's film. Sightings of skunk ape are probably nothing more than an escaped chimp. But not all clusters are as easily explained. The biggest hotspot the team cannot dismiss is the Pacific Northwest, a region that stretches from Northern California up through Oregon, Washington State, and well into Canada. This area has an unbroken history of sightings. It is from this region that the word Sasquatch originates, and local Native Americans describe sightings of a tribe of hairy giants that date back centuries. This ancient wisdom may be the key to solving the mystery of Bigfoot. A team of scientists is searching for definitive evidence of Bigfoot. Having examined the famous 1967 film by Roger Patterson, they found it caused a massive surge in sightings. But some areas were more affected than others. The team's global map shows them that hundreds of sightings in the Pacific Northwest took place long before Patterson's film, making them potentially far more reliable than sightings reported elsewhere in the years after. A key hotspot is the area around the town of Chilliwack in British Columbia. There were a cluster of sightings here in the early 1930s and 40s. One of the best documented encounters took place in July 1934 in a remote forest on the edge of the Chehalis Indian Reserve. Millie Saw and a friend are at home. Tonight they will encounter a creature they thought was only a local legend. The two women report a giant hairy hand at their window and being trapped for the whole night by a monstrous creature. It's an untarnished record from impeccable witnesses. And they're not alone. As we move forward in time on the global map, the reports from around Chilliwack just keep coming in increasing numbers. September 1941. This is Jenny Chapman and her young children. They're a respectable folk, known and trusted in the local community. It's a typical afternoon. The kids are playing, and Jenny is hanging her laundry. Her husband, Jack, is at work on the railroad. They're alone. Their home is miles from the nearest town. The forest is close and dense. And something is out there.
Come here, come behind me.
Jenny knows it's not a bear.
Come here, stay behind me.
And it certainly isn't human. She only knows it is a creature she has never seen before. Jenny Chapman and her children flee for their lives. Jack Chapman arrives home at dusk.
Sarah! Jenny!
He finds strange reddish-brown hair snagged on the high door lintel. The house has been ransacked. A 300-pound fish barrel has been lifted, broken apart, and the fish stolen. Realizing his wife and children are missing, he runs into the forest. Jack Chapman eventually finds his family taking refuge in the nearby town. The family never returns to the homestead. If the creature exists, the team agrees the Pacific Northwest might be one of the few places in the world with enough wilderness and resources to support a large omnivorous ape the size of Bigfoot. But there are some crucial questions they need to answer.
One of the things you need to work out is actually what they eat, particularly what they might eat during the winter when, food is presumably not very good supply. And the sort of the equivalent animal that you might think of would be something like a bear, which of course can hibernate. But the larger primates, really, it's not something that they can do. So you need a food supply.
Yeah, right. And in the Pacific Northwest, one thing to bear in mind that the coastal forests of British Columbia, for example, has very little snow accumulation during the winter. And so there are thousands of miles of coastline through that inside passage up into southeastern Alaska that actually is a very rich habitat and provides a lot of food resources throughout the year.
Yeah, things like shellfish and
Shellfish and kelp and all the invertebrates that are available in the tide pools.
The ransacking of the Chapman's house suggests Sasquatch has an appetite for fish. If so, it wouldn't be the only primate to eat seafood. Several species of monkeys eat mollusks they find in shallow water. But Sasquatch are frequently seen far inland at much higher altitudes. Surviving here would require Sasquatch to live on hard-to-process foodstuffs, like sedge grass, leaves, even bark. This in turn would require a specially adapted gut.
A very long gut with a long passage time allows them to process coarser food items, leaves and so forth, that would be unavailable to many other animals that inhabit the western United States. It's not out of the realm of possibility whatsoever.
But do sightings of Sasquatch in the Pacific Northwest match up with the best food zones for a large omnivorous ape? Using the global map, the team compares sightings with the best possible habitats. They match up almost perfectly.
Well, there's a lot of links between altitude, precipitation, and temperature, and also with vegetation. So if you get more rain, you tend to get more vegetation. So we're seeing them in the northwestern rainforest.
The whole team agrees that a giant omnivorous ape could survive in the Pacific Northwest. But they need to consider a crucial question. How did a giant ape get to North America? Seeking answers, they look to Asia and sightings of another famous unknown creature, the Yeti. Searching for evidence of Bigfoot, a team of scientists has been exploring the Pacific Northwest. They found an ideal habitat for an omnivorous great ape. Now they investigate reports of similar creatures in Asia, searching for links between them and an answer to how Bigfoot got to North America. Their first Asian location, the mighty Himalayas, the highest mountain range in the world. It's home to what local peoples know and fear as the Yeti. From our global map, our experts can see a tight cluster of sightings at altitudes over 9,000 feet above sea level, with an annual snow and rainfall of 40 inches. The most important evidence for Yeti is footprints. In 1951, climber Eric Shipton was at a height of 20,000 feet during an expedition to Mount Everest, when totally unexpectedly, he came across these ape-like giant prints. With no other humans living even remotely nearby, he was convinced they must have been genuine. Jeff Meldrum has a cast of the original Shipton footprint, and he's convinced it definitely came from a real creature.
It's quite distinctive in that the large toe is divergent from the remaining toes. A more thumb-like appendage. The Shipton footprint is further enigmatic in the fact that the second toe is quite enlarged. This may be a natural feature, or it could also be a pathology. We don't really know, since only a single footprint was documented.
It seems extremely unlikely that someone would add an injury to a faked footprint. And even more improbable that they would fake footprints on a remote snowfield more than 20,000 feet up in the Himalayas. The trouble is, this seems an unlikely habitat for a giant ape.
Primates are basically tropical animals. The sort of temperate, very cold areas that you see Yeti in are really very different from what you'd expect to see with a modern primate.
But there are exceptions. These Japanese macaques live at an altitude of over 10,000 feet and further north than any known primate. They've adapted to survive in temperatures of -4 degrees Fahrenheit. Could Yeti have adapted to live in the same environment?
There are other primates that are adapted for high altitudes, and they have very huge home ranges.
I don't think Yetis live in the snowfields. I think they pass through the snowfields, and they spend most of the time foraging in the forest where the food is. And on my one visit to Nepal, I was impressed by the number of food plants that were the same as mountain gorilla food plants.
Yeti's available diet and its footprints suggest it could be a creature closely related to a giant mountain gorilla. But locals say they have seen it tearing yaks and goats apart with claws. This seems impossible because apes don't have claws. Ian Redmond's experience on expedition suggests there may be a simple explanation.
I found the carcass of a wild goat, which had been eaten by a predator, and there were big cat prints nearby. But I would think that any intelligent hominid coming across a carcass killed by another predator would immediately avail himself of it.
Rather than kill yaks and goats itself, Yeti could be a scavenger. The team has little other evidence to go on. Tibetan and Nepalese monks treasure Yeti hairs and bones as sacred artifacts. Some samples have been analyzed for DNA, but so far, almost all have been identified as belonging to other known animals. But the Yeti isn't the only unknown giant creature in this isolated part of the world. Less than 300 miles from Mount Everest, in the mountainous jungles of the Garo Hills of northern India, there is a long history of sightings of an almost identical creature, called locally the Mande Barum.
Local people encounter them all the time. They see them in the forest. They say in general they're quite gentle, that they don't really harm you, but they're still extremely afraid of them.
Descriptions of the Mande Barum and the Yeti show such close similarities. Team member Ian Redmond thinks they are the same species, just adapted to different environments.
I think of it as the lowland Yeti. It's not up in the snowfields, it's down in hot, steamy tropical forests of northern India.
Evidence for this lowland Yeti is even more difficult to track down.
It's actually very good luck to get a piece of it. And so by the time anybody goes to investigate it, villagers have come from miles around and ripped off a token. And it's almost like a relic, a little piece of a saint. You never see a whole body, but you occasionally see the scalp or you see a finger bone. And in fact, local ranger he had a finger bone, and he wanted to have it submitted for DNA analysis to see what it was. And he gave it to the Department of Wildlife, and they thought it would bring mockery to the department, and so it disappeared.
I think what this does, though, is highlight the fear of ridicule, because anyone who's seen any of these things is likely to keep quiet about it because they'll be mocked.
1,000 miles east, in China, is what may be a third variety of Yeti. A creature the Chinese call the Yeren. In the mountainous forests of central China is a cluster of 200 sightings. But these are just reports from the last few decades. Legends of encounters with the Yeren, or wild man, date back to 200 BC. Yeren, Yeti, and Mande Barum, three almost identical Bigfoot-type creatures, all sighted within a few hundred miles of each other. The theory is they could all be linked and share the same ancestor, a giant ape that lived in Asia in the past. Remarkably, discovered only a few hundred miles south of these three clusters of sightings, is fossil evidence of a giant prehistoric ape. Called Gigantopithecus, for centuries its teeth were used as ingredients in Chinese medicine.
Gigantopithecus was first discovered by these molars that were being sold in Chinese apothecaries as dragon's teeth, and turned out to be big ape molars, and then a bit of mandible was found, I understand, and if you kind of put that together, it seems that it was a large gorilla-like ape.
It was using bone samples like this that team member Jack Rink, a specialist in fossil dating, worked out how long ago Gigantopithecus lived.
Well, to the best of our knowledge, Gigantopithecus's last known occurrence was about 300,000 years ago in southwest China. So that's your geographical and your temporal location for the last sighting in the fossil record.
This means Gigantopithecus was still alive at the time of our Stone Age ancestors.
There's almost no possibility that humans and Gigantopithecus did not encounter each other. So I really firmly believe that there has to have been interaction between these two primates.
The majority of the team believe that if the Yeti and Asia's other reported giant apes exist, they are almost certainly descendants of Gigantopithecus. But is the North American Sasquatch? Today, Asia and North America are separated by the Pacific Ocean. But many times over the last million years, a temporary land bridge has formed between Siberia and Alaska as sea levels have changed. It's possible a giant ape could have migrated across this precarious plateau of land into North America. But there's another creature that could also have made this journey. Now the team investigates evidence that sightings of Sasquatch might not be a giant ape, but a species much closer to man. One summer afternoon in 2007, Robert Wilson was driving in a heavily forested area on Vancouver Island. He didn't know it, but the area had a long history of Bigfoot sightings. Suddenly, he caught sight of something totally unexpected.
At a place called Maureen Creek, I'd just gone over the bridge when I saw through the trees what I thought was a bear. Slowed down and saw what I can only describe as a large, hairy man who looked caveman-like, if you wish, or sort of a Neanderthal features. As big as a bear, you know, easily. But it wasn't a bear, it had human features. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I could see very, very clearly.
Wilson's incredible sighting points to the possibility that Sasquatch may not be a giant ape at all, but could be some kind of prehistoric human. Our experts' global map reveals hundreds of sightings of giant Neanderthal-like humans all across Asia. The greatest concentration of these is in the Caucasus Mountains, south of Russia. These sightings became so numerous that over time the creatures were given a name. They are called almas, or almasti, meaning wild people. One of the most compelling and reliable of all the reports about the almas was documented in 1925. General Mikhail Stepanovich Topilsky of the Russian Red Army attempted to surprise what he'd been informed were rebel soldiers hiding in a remote cave. The Russians could hear something moving inside. To their horror, the general and his men discovered they had gunned down not a modern enemy, but some sort of prehistoric human.
The dead creature lay with his eyes open and his teeth bared. In general, the hair was very thick, without any underfur. The knees were completely bare of hair, and there were callous growths on them. The color of the face was dark. The nose was flat, with a deeply sunken bridge.
Well, the eyewitness descriptions of the almas, a heavily muscled body with a thick torso, deep-set eyes and heavy brows and very prominent cheekbones and thick jaws, could easily represent a Neanderthal.
But Neanderthals were only one of what we are now discovering to be a whole range of different types of early human.
One of the really interesting things about human evolution that we're now finding is that it's not a kind of evolutionary tree. It's more what we call an evolutionary bush. And there are lots of little side branches. There are lots of cousins of humanity that didn't go anywhere.
Evidence for other primitive human-type creatures has been increasing dramatically. In fact, fossil evidence of a human relative has been found on the island of Flores in Southeast Asia. And it shows that this creature was alive until recently. Unlike the almasti, they are very small. But they too are a separate species from modern man. Scientists named the creature Homo floresiensis,
Homo floresiensis, the hobbit, is always described as an example of island dwarfism. So this is an animal that's found itself on an island with none of the normal competitors that we'd normally have. And there is no need for it to be big anymore. Nothing's going to eat it because there are no predators. And so the particular ecology it's in is favoring being small.
Fossils of this real-life hobbit date to 10,000 years ago. But locals on nearby Sumatra have long spoken of a legendary small forest man they call Orang Pendek. Could this be the same creature? Or perhaps an even more primitive subspecies? Anna Nakaris has worked extensively in Southeast Asia, where she has discovered new species of primates. She's convinced local people's stories of Orang Pendek are reliable and of a real creature.
Local people can be extremely reliable, and there is a lot to say in listening to the stories of the people that live in these remote places.
The thing that's so fascinating to me is the life that's been breathed into the legend, so to speak, by the recent discovery of the Homo floresiensis, the hobbit. You know, the prospect of a relic population of hominid or another type of primate might not be so far-fetched.
Incredibly, just as these local stories have proved Orang Pendek might have a basis in fact, so too, new evidence reveals what might be the remains of the real-life Almasty. In March 2010, an amazing new discovery was made on the borders of Russia and Kazakhstan, in the same region as the 1925 encounter. From just a single finger bone, scientists identified yet another type of human species. They're calling it the X-woman, or Homo denisova.
So we've got this X-woman that's just been identified just from a finger bone that we've extracted DNA from. And the DNA in this finger bone is sufficiently different from the DNA that we've extracted from other modern humans and from Neanderthals that we think it was probably from a completely different species. So in fact, having multiple species of humanity is probably the norm.
Scientists now think Homo denisova was a cousin of Homo floresiensis. Some of the team believe remnants of multiple species of humans could still be living today.
These days, we seem not to be able to imagine that we can be living side by side with another bipedal creature, whereas in fact, we did for 1 million years. And that was only discovered for certain in the 1980s.
Exactly. Why would the present be the exception to the rule that has seemed to prevail for literally millions of years?
An astonishing new discovery in China may supply the team with another possible candidate in their search to explain Bigfoot. A giant ancestor of Neanderthal called Homo heidelbergensis. Until recently, heidelbergensis was believed to have gone extinct more than 250,000 years ago. But according to Jeff Meldrum, these newly unearthed remains may completely rewrite these dates.
It's remarkable because the preliminary dates have been placed at about 12,000 years ago, which is extremely recent.
This find suggests heidelbergensis was still alive in Asia when the first modern humans were migrating to North America. Like them, it could have crossed the land bridge that once connected Siberia and Alaska. Next, the team examined if the North American Sasquatch could really be a type of primitive human. In their quest to find definitive evidence of Bigfoot, a team of scientists is examining the possibility that the creature may be a type of early human. They've been investigating a potential suspect called Homo heidelbergensis, a giant ancestor of Neanderthals, which could have crossed into North America from Asia. They turn to one of the earliest written records of an encounter with Bigfoot. Could it be the same creature? 1891. Herman Gilbert and his brother-in-law have come west to stake a claim for land. They're in Northern California, at the southern end of the Cascade Mountains. This is the same area where Roger Patterson will shoot his famous film of a giant ape-like creature 76 years later. But from all accounts, what they're about to witness may not be an ape, but some kind of human. Both men have already heard the local stories of the What Is It, a legendary local monster to be avoided at all costs. Herman discovers signs of it first, giant footprints. Bones and gore litter the area. The smell is overpowering. Then they spot the creature itself. A huge, hairy man, bathed in blood, beating its chest and wailing in anger. Like others who have seen it before them, Gilbert and his brother-in-law flee. This early story of Sasquatch clearly describes a Neanderthal-like man. One possible candidate for Bigfoot is an ancestor of Neanderthal called Homo heidelbergensis. Heidelbergensis was the biggest known ancient human. We have specimens a towering 6.5 feet tall, but there could easily be others that were much taller. But Jeff Meldrum thinks Sasquatch behavior is far too wild to be explained as that of a human.
In the case of heidelbergensis, given its degree of sophistication, intelligence, cultural evolution, it seems unlikely that it would have simply abandoned all of those trappings of humanity to adopt an austere life in the wild.
But some of the team disagree and think it may be because it's an early human and has kept some of its human-like traits that we can't find it. It may still practice human rituals, like burying its dead.
Perhaps they bury them in unmarked graves. They don't just die and rot in the forest. There is some ceremony involved. That would account for not finding remains.
Maybe due to competition, these large-brained, intelligent human species are really doing their best to avoid humans. And so they've gone more or less into a cryptic behavior, operating at a time when we don't see them or in habitats we don't choose.
But sometimes our worlds do cross, as the Chapmans found out when their house was ransacked in 1941. It's likely Homo heidelbergensis could easily lift and smash a 300-pound barrel of fish. Fossils show heidelbergensis had much thicker bones than a modern human.
Bone's expensive, so if you've got thick bones, then you're going to have fairly big muscles to operate these things. Thick bones, big muscles, and therefore you were stronger.
This stronger frame and muscles could also explain how the creatures have regularly been reported to run at speeds of 30 miles per hour.
Sprinters, it's all about power. It's all about having kind of a bigger engine. So that's sort of more muscle for your weight. Perhaps they were built for sprinting.
Today's fastest sprinters average 6.3 feet tall and run at 27 miles per hour. A super strong 6'5" heidelbergensis could easily be faster. And that's not all. Native American stories of Sasquatch describe hairy, rock-throwing men, which closely match the description of heidelbergensis. The tribes of the Pacific Northwest also report the Sasquatch's attraction to human women. These stories stretch back centuries But even today, they remain protective of women when they believe Bigfoot is at large.
When non-tribal people visit those locations where they take special care and they escort the females back to their vehicles and make sure that they are safely off the reservation. And I've personally been escorted off a reservation because they believed that there was a Bigfoot in the location.
One woman who says she knows what it's like to be pursued by a Sasquatch is Cindy Dosen. In April 2008, she was out in the forest around Maple Mountain, Vancouver Island, when an unidentified giant creature pursued her.
It was in the bush, breaking limbs and smashing trees, about 2 steps behind me.
She fled for her life.
This thing screaming and hollering at me. I need to hide, get out of the way. It was like it was hurting me or pushing me along.
The creature chased Cindy several hundred yards until she reached the safety of her 4x4 and sped off.
And when I got into my car, I started crying. I just fell apart. And I wouldn't go back out in the woods for up to 3 weeks. I just would not. There's just no way.
Was this a close encounter with a lone male Sasquatch searching for a mate? Some First Nation legends go as far to say Sasquatch had children by human women.
There is oral tradition that it's happened in the past. They do talk about that offspring have been produced, and the child will only usually live a very short period of time due to rapid growth. It's usually very slow, can't learn the language, doesn't learn any traditions.
But if Sasquatch really is a heidelbergensis, mating with a human might not be as far-fetched as you might think. Recent genetic research has revealed early modern humans mated successfully with Neanderthals. Many people today still carry Neanderthal genes. The team has assessed a body of evidence that supports the idea that Sasquatch could be an ancient human. Height, strength, speed, even sexual attraction all make more sense if Sasquatch is a type of oversized heidelbergensis. But Professor Jack Rink is about to propose a dramatic, never-before-revealed theory that suggests Bigfoot isn't an ancient species, but a type of modern human that has transformed itself into a creature of the wild. Our scientists believe there are most likely 2 explanations for Bigfoot, if it exists. The first is that it's a giant ape descended from a prehistoric creature called Gigantopithecus. The second, it's an unidentified species of ancient human, possibly a Homo heidelbergensis. But now the team investigates a third possibility, a new theory that focuses on the Pacific Northwest. Could sightings of Sasquatch be explained not by giant apes or prehistoric men, but by modern-day humans? Based on research into the Native American Squamish Nation, Jack Rink has learned of the secretive training rituals that must be undertaken by the tribe's shamans.
One of the aspects of the Squamish Nation oral tradition is that people become literally wild people through shamanic processes where they have to go off and stay isolated for periods of over 10 years, eating wild foods, being isolated from the other parts of their tribe. So the living wild people apparently do exist.
The clues that helped reveal this groundbreaking evidence were uncovered on the rugged shoreline of British Columbia by one of the Squamish Nation's foremost scholars, Professor Rudy Reimer. Reimer was searching for stone tools used by his ancestors when they first settled the area more than 10,000 years ago.
People picked up local rocks and modified them for plant gathering and hunting and a whole wide range of other activities.
But he kept finding stone tools in out-of-the-way places. And intriguingly, many appeared to have been in use in recent times.
When we did find them, they were in odd locations. They were in remote, hard-to-access areas. And to me, as a First Nations person, as an archaeologist, I began thinking about those sites in a different way.
Why were these tools being discovered in such out-of-the-way places? Rudy Reimer realized the sites he had been excavating were on land the Squamish had always held sacred, but left untouched. These remote places were reserved for what traditions called the wild people, the Sma-Li.
I went into certain areas of our territory. The elders would ask me, say, well, why are you going there? That's where the wild people live.
But Reimer realized even the elders did not know all of the tribe's secrets. For millennia, Squamish shamans, the tribe's priests, had undergone a form of initiation known only among themselves. They would disappear into the wild, remote places to learn the secrets of nature. Could there be a connection between the shamans and the Sma-Li? Finding stone tools at the same remote sites seemed to prove it.
While they were out there, it would be very common for those individuals to use stone implements. And as a result, we find remnants in very remote locations where people would have gone to do those spiritual training, those physical training activities.
But how could shamans be mistaken for Sasquatch? The young men who undertook shamanic training were expected to live in complete isolation from the rest of the world. They were forbidden from coming into contact with people. Cut off, even from their own tribe, their training could take years. In the process, gradually transforming them into unrecognizable wild men.
After a few years, they would have appeared very differently than someone living back at their home village, interacting with plants, animals, being on their own for extended periods of time. You know, they would have become very physically fit. Their hair would have become very long and unkept, but they also be behaving differently. They may be mistaken for what we call an ape or a strange creature dwelling out in the wilderness.
Some traditions even speak of these wild young men covering their bodies in thick horsehair moss to keep warm.
If someone was wearing a coat of black lichen, of course, they'd look like a hairy man. Yeah. But at the same time, are they doing that because they want to look like a Sasquatch as part of their ritual?
Yeah. It's easy to see how the legend of hairy wild men was born.
My perspective offers a cultural explanation for what we call Sasquatch, or what we in the Squamish Nation call Sma-Li, the wild people.
Explaining Sasquatch as a case of mistaken identity would only be possible if shamanic training was still happening in the forests of British Columbia today. Incredibly, this seems to be the case.
Carries on into modern day, and those people who are re-engaging with the landscape in those various forms of training, they bring back important messages of the landscape.
And it's not just the Squamish people. Tribes all over the Pacific Northwest have similar age-old traditions of wild man training. Can more than 400 local eyewitnesses over more than 100 years actually have been staring into the eyes of Squamish shamans? And could similar shamanic initiations explain sightings elsewhere?
And the question might arise, can these account for all of the Bigfoot Sasquatch sightings that we have in North America?
Could this really be an answer to the question of Bigfoot?
There have to be a whole lot of tribes participating in this back to nature wild man concept in order for that to be a reality. I don't see how the essence of what Bigfoot is to so many cultures across North America could possibly be represented with such a simple explanation.
It's time for the team to weigh the evidence and reveal their findings. The team investigating the worldwide mystery of Bigfoot is coming to its conclusions. They've narrowed down their inquiry to 3 potential suspects for what the creature, if it exists, could be. Now they consider this 3rd and latest suspect, Native American shamans training in the wild.
Can these account for all of the Bigfoot Sasquatch sightings that we have in North America?
It wouldn't account for the 16-inch footprints, though, would it?
Ian Redmond has spotted a major flaw in the shaman theory. The creature is named Bigfoot for good reason. No ordinary human could ever leave footprints like these. Studying the giant-sized footprints allegedly left by Sasquatch is Jeff Meldrum's specialty. He's studied hundreds of them and found the distribution of sizes follows a pattern identical to a real animal species.
This is exactly the type of data we would expect if we were, in fact, sampling a real population.
But the existence of hoaxers makes any definitive conclusion drawn from footprints alone uncertain. What we really need is a live specimen, or the next best thing, its bones.
As soon as you have a skull, everyone is happy. You've got all the information you need, particularly things like teeth, because, you know, they're so different between different mammal species. If you had, there'd be no argument. It would be kind of a done deal.
There is no fossil evidence either, but some of the experts are not surprised.
We know virtually nothing about gorilla fossil history because they live in forests. And in forests, fossils don't form very well. There's this scrabble for nutrients. An animal dies, it decomposes, and all the nutrients go back into the trees or other animals, and you don't get fossils.
But if Sasquatch is a giant ape, there is other evidence the scientists might expect to find.
If they're eating all this vegetable matter, they're producing a lot of dung. Perhaps they bury it. Perhaps their tradition is to scoop a hole, defecate in it, and cover it. And that's why we never find dung around the forest where they live.
All the scientists have are tantalizing clues. Hair samples that don't register as any known species. Recorded calls in the night. And most crucial of all, thousands of eyewitness reports from all over the world. Using their global map, the team has advanced the search for Bigfoot in unexpected new directions. By analyzing clusters of sightings, they have revealed fascinating new insights into its likely habitat, behavior, and ancestry. Most important of all, they have shown how the Roger Patterson film of 1967 set off an unprecedented wave of sightings that continues to this day. But by closely examining the changing patterns of data before and after Patterson's film, the team has turned the clock back and filtered out many of the distortions the footage has caused. This helped them rule out either hoaxes or cases of mistaken identity, like Florida's skunk ape, which the team believes is probably one or more escaped chimps or other species of ape. On the other side of the world, in the forest of Sumatra, the team found the opposite, a history of sightings that cannot be explained by mistaken identity. What the 3-foot-high orang pendek is, no one yet knows, but most of the team thinks it's a genuine case of an unknown creature.
I think of all of them, that's got a very strong possibility to be discovered.
Elsewhere in Asia, by analyzing sightings of Yeti, Yeren, and the Mande Burung, the team found they were all reported within a few hundred miles of each other. The discovery of fossils of a giant ape called Gigantopithecus, found in the same part of Asia, pointed to what might be their common ancestor. But they also examined striking fossil evidence of another potential Bigfoot suspect, the Neanderthal-like almasty. If such creatures exist, they must have crossed into North America from Asia along the now vanished land bridge called Beringia. The final question our experts must confront is, did they? Bill Sellers thinks not.
This is an absolute case there that we've not got the cut and dried evidence. We've got no skull, we've got no bones, and eventually we have to admit that we should have that.
But Jeff Meldrum is optimistic. Like the recently discovered X-woman, just one bone could change science's view of Bigfoot overnight.
A single tooth could make all the difference. Suddenly, I think there would be much more interest in the Sasquatch question from the mainstream scientific community.
Jack Rink remains open-minded about the existence of giant unknown apes in the world.
I'm not completely convinced that we are dealing with a mistaken identity phenomenon. I think there's a considerable amount of evidence that there may be, in fact, some primates out there.
Anna Nakaris and Ian Redmond believe the sightings are strong enough to warrant further detailed investigation.
It's extraordinary. Why aren't we putting more people on the ground to live in remote areas with all the appropriate equipment to record sounds and capture on camera traps these creatures?
But what creature do they hope to find?
Well, certainly there is a lot of difference of opinion as to what the nature of the Sasquatch is. There are those, such as myself, that hypothesize that it's much nearer an ape in its nature. But there are also others who maintain this is a type of person. If that is the case, then we really have to sort of redefine what the label human encompasses.
Whatever Bigfoot is, remains a mystery we may never solve. Like many extinct species, it may already have vanished into history without leaving any physical trace. But if it still survives, it surely hides in the last remote and unexplored places of our planet, constantly keeping just one step ahead of us.